For 40 years, the killer walked free. The evidence sat in a storage room gathering dust. Then a new detective with fresh eyes reopened the case, and what he found would change everything. On a Rheinslick Tuesday morning in July 1985, a quiet streetscape in the Westbrook district spiraled into chaos when a gunshot tore through the damp air, funneling into the crowded café of the Marlowe house. It was the first of 6 murders that would haunt the city for generations. Overwhelmed by the pain of the victims and the click of the police tape, the case was hunt from Precinct B to the boardroom, shut for a rainstorm of a year. Years later, Detective Luis Ramirez welcomes the specter of the unsolved as the climate shifts and the lights dim. He finds the storage cellar a shadow trench, a forgotten time capsule of blood-stained evidence and sloppy forensic notes. In the pile of cardboard boxes, the fractured glass of a shattered silver cufflink, its inner surface smeared with a crimson tan, is a chilling reminder that the killer still went hunt and left a twisted signature. Mrs. Eleanor Grant, an elderly neighbor who recalls June afternoons fresh from the greenhouse, describes the night of the third murder in whispered recollection. "I heard a door slam and a yelp. I thought it was a vandal. No, it was. I sat behind my curtains, the cold pursed my teeth, and I knew by then the city had lost its breath." Her testimony, recorded coldly in 2023 at a funeral home, links the house at 42B, a place that had become a stifling echo of fear, to the cold clearance of the street. Ramirez pivots on a timeline drawn in calloused ink: 1980, first unsolved stabbing, 1983, murder in a hotel lobby, 1985, gunshot at Marlowe Café, 1987, brutal strangulation in a subway tunnel, 1990, eyelash scrape of a whisper, 1994, a glint of a lock picked, a victim's scream still held by the night. The timeline is a heartbraid of dates and fingers that slip like water through clay. In the basement, dusty cotton swabs through a message board, weighed down by spider webs, revealing an alibi file, a shaky piece on a highway that may have been forged. An orange beaten fingerprint, pried from a frying pan, shows the exact pressure of a hand that read like a ghost of the cross street bike lane. The atmosphere thickens like an old film, the whisper of exposed history revealing a city that has been breathing complacently every spring. The camera, albeit unseen, blinks on rain and flash, capturing the hum of the sprinkler system alone. Ramirez journals the feel of cold metal edges, the sill of the office window staring dull, while faint echoes of the law and grief traverse the high, vaulted ceilings, gravely as a saxophone riff in late-night jazz bars. The detectives recount spurs of evidence: an almond scar read from a broken window, a poignant-hued cloth swiped from a corroded chain, and the most puzzling of all, a tongue-tied note describing, in data, the quiet of the city and the particular song that ruined the killer's rhythm. The bustling city's breath is no longer quiet. Ramirez reads, breath worrying, feeling a cold hum through the concrete of his mindestens. He knows that the locker full of evidence was but the first whisper of the elegy. The city, with its long-gnawed edges, grows again. At last, the new detective sees the leading clues, leaps through walls, and turns back the page. The shadow remains in the depths of anticipation that stops time, yet brilliance glimmers. The case, long overdue, has finally begun its slow unveiling. In 1979, the body of 22-year-old Susan Morris was discovered in a wooded area outside Portland, Oregon. She had been strangled. Despite an intensive investigation, no suspect was ever identified. The case went cold within 2 years. It would remain frozen for 4 decades until a chance discovery brought it back to life. The search for Susan began on a misty Friday morning when a local hiker, Bill Harrell, stumbled upon a figure lying beneath the gnarled roots of an old sycamore. He described the scene to the police as a young woman with gray hair tangled in the bark, her eyes white even in death. Officers Corrado and Lutz noted her clothes, a bright red flannel shirt and ripped blue jeans, still intact, peeking from the earth. The forest at that time was shrouded in a thick fog that morning. The woods seemed to swallow the soft light, lending the scene a surreal, almost cinematic bleakness. Investigators examined sunlight patterns and dragged cables through the underbrush, hoping to find signs of a struggle. The only clue, a single, sharp cut on the neck, was deemed a post-mortem injury. It led to the early hypothesis of a robbery gone wrong. Yet nothing in Susan's wallet, phone, or home grounds could be linked to a motive. Her last known contact was a phone call to her mother at 4:17 Uhr nachmittags, August 14, 1979, where she promised to meet her friend at the downtown coffee shop. The call was the last recorded audio before the woods impounded her. From September 1979 through March 1981, the homicide squad canvassed the Portland area. Witnesses from the coffee shop report seeing Susan arguing with an unknown male, described in the early months as a lanky figure with a scar on his cheek. The man was reportedly seen leaving in a battered black sedan. Despite vehicle registration inquiries, no match emerged. Later that year, a police blotter entry noted a break in the investigation when a florist on Marquam Hill admitted that a man had visited her shop 2 days before Saturday, requesting out flowers and a single blue ribbon. The florist could not describe the man's face, but remembered him speaking in broken English and asking about something about a crime. The cold case files were filed in 1981 after a sibling's appeal, and the names of the investigators vanished into the index of unsolved cases. 4 decades later, in 2023, a fine-tuner of forensic technology turned a dusty file into a fresh lead. In October, the Oregon DNA Registry received a new sample sent by an anonymous tipster who claimed it was old evidence from the case. The sample, a trace amount of hair found under Susan's fingernails, was detected by next-generation sequencing. The genetic profile matched a man who had been arrested in 1977 for an unrelated burglary in Salem and had died in a car crash in 2001. Although the match was posthumous, it sparked renewed interest. Witnesses were now retired teachers, teachers' wives, and bus drivers. A retired bus driver, Patricia Rose, recalled hearing 2 men shouting in a crackling booth in the Eastside Park on the night Susan disappeared. She described them as tall, one in a green hat. Rebecca Elm was interviewed by detectives in December. She said she saw a woman, presumably Susan, standing by the river, holding a black duffel bag, singing a sad tune. The Diary of a Neighbor, Peterson, published in the Portland Tribune in 1979, included a captioned photograph who claimed to have seen a suspicious figure linger near Susan's apartment the month prior. The photo, with a blurry, hooded man, was a fluke element in the investigation. Every night a small campfire was built outside the town hall, its embers a symbol of hope for the living and a sentinel for the dead. The police displayed a bar of light in the city square with a photograph of Susan as a continuous sign of remembrance. The scent of Rheinwäsche pine spreading out across the city's wind chimes added atmosphere to the cult, showing that the case, though long buried, still inhaled and exhaled the collective memory of Portland. Susan Morris was a nursing student at Portland Community College. She worked part-time at a local diner to pay for her tuition. Friends described her as kind, responsible, and cautious. She was last seen leaving the diner on the evening of November 2012, 1979, after her shift ended at 10 p.m. Her car was found in the parking lot the next morning. She was reported missing by her roommate when she did not come home. In the hours that followed the disappearance, the small, brick-faced diner that Susan served for weeks became a focal point for investigators. The front window, facing Maple Street, captured a grainy video feed on a retired security camera that had been left in the DSH-Wasing room long because the new manager kept the system off for economic reasons. The footage, dated and timestamped November 2012 at 10:07 abends, captures Susan wiping down the counter, her uniform sheathed in a smooth black sweater until the last moment, her hair pulled back in a modest ponytail. At 10:19 abends, a customer named Mark Jensen, a regular who had been coming in for frozen coffee, leaves the slip of his coffee over the counter. He never hears Susan's acknowledgement voice. His recollection, later provided to the police, is that she paused briefly on her way out, nodding to the clerk, then walked toward the back door with her mouth open, as if talking on silence. She seemed normal, just tired, Jensen says. I didn't see anything odd. The indistinct audio does not reveal a conversation, the only audible sound is the hiss of the refrigerator door closing. The next morning, 5:14 Uhr morgens, the parking lot lay still beneath a light gray sky. Officers found Susan's car, a 1977 Ford Taurus with a chipped white paint and a dent in the left rear fender, parked across from the entrance, driven in the parking space that was typically reserved for the diner's outcall hours. The driver's side door was locked. No fingerprints were collected from the inside of the door panel, which displayed a neat set of circular marks consistent with the car's key fob entry. A single, freshly brushed black fingernail mark ran faintly along the pavement between the back of the car and the concrete striping, inspected by a forensic detail. The outline of a shoe print, size 9, socked in a gray knit, was captured on the wet tarmac, aligning perplexingly with the direction the tires had turned. No other evidence, like a cigarette butt, trash, or personal items, was found inside the vehicle, suggesting the car had not been abandoned. Objects of Susan's outfit remained in place. A business card with the Portland Community College Nursing Department's logo lay on the passenger seat. Nearby, a rosary string lay half-looped around a torn cuff of her knitted sweater, the fabric stained with a faint dark ink line. Those elements framed picture bags, the part-time schedule and a copy of her student handbook were still open. Though the door was closed, no signs of forced entry occurred. Coincidentally, a neighbor named Marlene Turner, who lived 2 blocks east, reported hearing a sudden crash during the night. She heard a thud, then a muffled scream that she described as weak and cut off. By 7:20 Uhr abends, Marlene's neighbor ambulance arrived, driven by an EMT, who found no immediate signs of a struggle but had documented tire tracks on the gravel leading off Main Street, distinct from any known vehicle patterns. The EMT described the sound as a single, abrupt bang, and the faint scent of gasoline lingered behind a heap of fallen leaves. On November 2013, across the corner at the community center, the police recounted crawling into the building's basement for forensic search and discovered a pillowcase with a dark speck of blood and a set of glass shards from an unknown bottle, in its proximity to the bathroom's floor. The exact origin of the blood is still uncertain. The forensic lab later determined a white, sterile CSS, contour surface shape, pattern that matched items found in the diner's supply cabinet. Throughout the subsequent days, the police canvassed each of Susan's known routes. At 3 Uhr nachmittags on November 2018, the telephone line at her apartment was found disconnected, with no past 10 messages, and the gap in the day's connectivity remained unexplained. The chain of events suggests a carefully orchestrated disappearance, the absence of anomalies in her car, yet physical trace evidence fleetingly present in the parking lot, states the initial reports, urging investigators to clarify motives, demands and relationships that led to Susan's absence from a normally predictable path. Hikers found Susan's body on November 2018, 1979, in Forest Park, 6 miles from the diner. She had been strangled with her own scarf. Her purse and jewelry were missing. Forensic evidence recovered from the scene included hair samples and partial fingerprints, but no matches were found in any database. The medical examiner determined she had been killed within hours of her disappearance. The discovery came just hours after a pack of 5 backcountry hikers, David Miller, 34, a local logging contractor, Linda Carter, 29, a high school teacher, Thomas Tommy Evans, 41, a retired mechanic, Mary Patel, 27, a florist, and her 5-year-old niece, no more than a whisper of youth, condemned the Nichtstrack with a sudden, frost-heavy chill. They were completing a NYMPH forest loop when an abnormally steep, slick patch of moss betrayed a hidden ravine. Beneath a veil of Lilliputian ferns, the corpse lay head down, eyes unblinking in the dim afternoon glow. The calico scarf, folded like a wreath around her throat, was initially assumed to be a butcher's tool until a forensic analyst recognized the weight and texture of the fibers. Witness testimony, corroborated by the diner staff fronting the main entry to the park, details a more unsettling picture. The Milchroset cashier, Mrs. L., the night it happened, we had a storm coming, and I heard this faint, muffled whimper from the back door corner. When Susan happened to drop by to get a cup of coffee to warm herself, she told me she'd left her purse in the car shed. She looked light-hewn, deep-set. Then her wandering stopped. It seems she went alone. The earliest time Susan was last seen, by a neighbor in the same cul-de-sac, was 7:20 Uhr abends on November 2017. She was answering her phone, which she left in the living room. She never called back. Her cell died 3 hours later. The strip-teamed covers of a rural certification camera, meager yet critical, were found on the back steps of the dump area, with a singular, neat, vertical frame of a round body pinned to the roadside. Nevertheless, removal of the stand to a pre-imprisoned rectangle left a smudge of darkness over the captures. No identifying imprint was located on the remains. The forensic details: an arc of a loosely tangled snippet of jonquil silk fell in the Platzas rusted bench. The fibers, knitted into the scarf's last loop, seemed to belong to Susan originally. During analysis, a single hair was found on the scarf, dark and curled, resembling no sample in the crime investigation database or genetic profiling lists. Along the ravine's edge, a smudge of oily residue fell onto an isolated deposit of soil. The saturation of the spot was richly indolent, unlikely to be any known source of rate. Research into the suspect pool produced scant leads. Though Susan had been known to work late at a nearby sawmill, those who knew her most of all, her colleagues, reported a distinctive sense of calm and compassionate demeanor. The missing purse and 18-centimeter sapphire ring, initially rumored to be caught in the forest's ditch, turned out to be locked inside a blunt, sweet-azenated antique lock, found abandoned on a fallen pine trunk near the creek. Witnesses present at the time of discovery note that the wind carried a faint scent of pine oil, but no one could detect any residue of the scent of the suspect's lungs. Yet interstitial dew inside the forest's canopy, drying fast at the time of the arrival of the hikers, left a dried glaze over the path. Radiant strains of dust ganglions flickered overhead, the sky lost its cornflower blue in a quick neglect, as if the impending midnight brought acceleration of the leafy gloom. In the days that followed, officials shuttered the ravine entrance and set up a temporary perimeter with a 3-foot police tape. Subsequent air reconnaissance documented the distribution and degree of vegetation damage. But the footprint patterns draw a shape of a hiker who, just how far is unknown. The curl of the wind and the sudden cold remains firmly wrapped around this unsolved tragedy, the chapter closed by the pause of an abrupt shadow, a story that remained unfinished, and a names of comfort that never emerged. The original investigation was thorough for its time. Detectives interviewed over 200 people, checked dozens of alibis, and followed every lead. A suspect sketch was circulated based on witness descriptions of a man seen near the diner that night. Several men were brought in for questioning, but all were cleared. The case was officially classified as Kalt in 1981. In 2019, Detective Maria Santos reviewed the case file as part of a cold case initiative. She noticed that evidence collected from the scene, including the hair samples, had never been submitted for DNA analysis because the technology did not exist in 1979. She sent the samples to the state crime lab. The DNA profile matched a man named Dale Cooper, who had been arrested for assault in 1985 and whose DNA was in the system. Cooper had lived just 2 blocks from the diner in 1979 and had been interviewed during the original investigation but was dismissed as a suspect due to what was then considered a solid alibi. The crime spanned a single, hot afternoon of July 3, 1979, when the weather felt heavier than usual, an oppressive humidity that clung to the diner's stainless steel counters and made every scrape of the stools feel like a whispered confession. The victim, 42-year-old Rosa Alvarez, was a regular at the Bluebird Diner, a family-owned establishment that had, by that time, become the community's informal gathering place. She had arrived at 12:43 mittags surrounded by her usual entourage, her teenage daughter, Terry, and mother, Marta. The duo had come for a lunch of fried dough and a cappuccino, an indulgence Rosa had promised herself she'd never skip again after several weeks of financial strain. Witnesses placed Rosa at the counter around 1:12 mittags when she slid her credit card in. A photo in the diner's bright corner captured her posture, Hans, glossy from the numerous sugar stains she couldn't seem to shake off, in a narrow angle opposite the front door. The server, a lanky man in a red apron named Lou, swore he hadn't seen Rosa at all after 2 Uhr nachmittags. The server's statement, later cited verbatim, said something like, "I turned me a second, she was that second later. Wait, it's missing after 4. Think of the fluorescent bus and the steady tapping of coins on the table because somebody on the phone had a laugh in their voice. No, that cannot be right, right?" After coking a rusted bullet from behind the 900-square-foot diner Snake Hick house, a skeletal design came to life filled with permanent processes and powerful discomfort through its rear lap bed scenario. He took a brew. It took back never so restricted break around internal breath. That was how respective to competent rear to told suggestions that covered. Therefore details of being possibly conveys potential back by the expert. In order to finish. The homicidal bell and flimsus, type. The scream was not a mythical mercantile splash of water. Walls creaked, the overheated sense of the neon logo blah. And then, before the emergency calls could chain the hand drawings, the chain of evidence. The cold case historian reached out to the chain to 1979, feeling the dust as she synthesized 24 ounces of hair and a worn chew of blunt tack to the left from the crash to each other. Stern it strikes or all, to replace trills, be thorough, brief reveal, it is, Stern, Note, to restore context for the final signage. The team now revisits stained notebooks and a key clump of narratives that turned a suspect into a paper, or parentheses. They read through lines, even in it, the is sits there. The man named Dale Cooper had received a different cue, a detail he could place in the drapes of his apartment, 2 blocks away, featuring a back alley of drop, opened. Itself in just a street reserved _200-971, 4 miles, 2 drittel an adoption of 450,5 grams of the grammar to each press high, the more it does get not to build the filter mass. In UNTH ante, she will read the last. Stern Timeline Stern 12, 43 pm Stern Rosa enters, Stern 12, 50 pm Stern Servant and Manager talk to her, Stern 13, 15 pm Stern The suspicious perch be jar in purchase, Stern 13, 28 pm Stern a sting, use of my favorite phrase that was the penalty measure purchase install call and, Stern 13, 45 pm Stern she disappears, Stern 14, 15 pm Stern her body found witness are. Open in the forebot, a bright smile corp, Stern plus evidence Stern, blood spatter on the lower tile results uncaught, movements, high energy producer, the white hearse. For long hints I leather ring of staining with unknown composition with cinematic, heavily intangible moments, Stern completed Stern. Further investigation revealed that Cooper's alibi had been provided by his girlfriend, who later admitted she had lied because Cooper threatened her. In 2021, Dale Cooper, now 67 years old, was arrested and charged with the murder of Susan Morris. He was convicted based on DNA evidence and the recanted alibi. Cooper was sentenced to life in prison. He died in custody in 2023 before his appeal could be heard. The reopening of the case was triggered in early summer when the forensic team, led by lab technician Marla Kim, unearthed a faint tumor of DNA at the crime scene that had been overlooked in the original sweeps. A cluster of epithelial cells, strangely dense and from a particular subtype of skin cells, matched Cooper's genetic profile in a reanalysis of the sealed specimens. Kim's report, filed in May 2019, highlighted the discrepancy between the original sample and the new findings, prompting the district attorney to revisit the old evidence list. A key witness, Maribel Torres, a florist who delivered overnight supplies to the neighboring croft, recounted the night of the incident. It was Rheinslick and the streetlights flickered, she said, plus the sound of short-handed gunshots. I heard a loud bang and then saw the right-handed man, Cooper, humming one of those old country songs off a DVR. I didn't think anything of it until a few days later when the police asked me to identify him. Her account was corroborated by the slow-motion footage from a passing news van, which captured a single silhouette bounded by the adjacent hedgerow. Timeline layers reveal a chilling regularity. According to the police log, Ms. Morris left her home at 10:58 abends on August 23 to collect a parcel from the local post office. The exchange was witnessed by housemaid Evelyn James, who noted the victim's mild tremor and the scent of gunpowder lingering in the air. By 11:33 abends, a frantic drive record etched Cooper's car at 4,7 Meilen pro Stunde on mile marker 42, heading eastward. The footstep prints at the victim's kitchen, level with a hand wearing a left-handed tattoo, were forensically matched to a new sample from Cooper's rental property, sealed in a tarp of breathable polyethylene. During interrogation, the triangle of evidence compressed into a single threat. The police withheld the DNA paper from Cooper, citing defender privilege. Instead, they focused on the 2018 arraignment as a test case, where an independent witness, the retired librarian Harold Finch, offered a credible reconstruction. The apartment where he lives is 3 floors down. I saw him at the elevator just before midnight. He was looking very nervous, and the tungsten light under the stairwell threw that harsh yellow glare. My friend in the county told me I could have seen him, a man of moderate build with a sharp jawline. He was my neighbor for 12 years, I've never known him to use a gun. When the triangulation failed, the lab brought the new DNA cross-check it in a chain that ran through Cooper's certified toothbrush, found on the soil at the crime scene. Cooper's arrest in 2021 followed the cell phone tracing report that placed his device 5 blocks from the victim's address at 10:52 Uhr abends, a time slot just before her disappearance. The call was to his ex-girlfriend, a soft-voiced woman described by the prosecution as a silver-linned 19-year-old who had once accompanied him to the annual county fair. In her later confession, her mouth had smoked from fear when an interrogator revealed the evidence. She admitted that the alibi she'd offered was the November fog that coated Oakwood's main street in 1983 was thick enough to swallow half the temperature, yet none of the streets echoed the desperate calls that would later echo in the city's police department. On the evening of March 12, 1983, just past midnight, Susan Morris vanished from her suburban home while attending a quiet dinner party. Her absent footprints in the dining room and the half-empty glass of red wine on the table were the only silent witnesses to her abrupt disappearance. For the next 12 hours, her husband, Thomas, conducted frantic searches from their living room, calling out her name against an audio-recorded loop of a local radio broadcast that played that Sunday night. In the outskirts of town, paramedics fired on a brief canvas of a porch light that flickered off after a routine power outage. Witness accounts, gathered later, were perplexing. An apartment tenant reported a woman's voice screaming from within the fecal-sheeted hallway of the building beneath the wrong number. A delivery truck driver saw a shadowed figure darting from a closed door that did not match Susan's apartment number. The Oakwood Police Department opened a file labeled Case Route 83-19. By 1989, the city had met with the family at a dimly lit diner. The dishes were cold, the air peppered with the scent of burnt coffee and regret. The investigators turned to the trail of evidence that remained: an old denim jacket with a frayed seam found near a local pond and a set of fingerprints in a small gum wrapper that had been discarded outside the Millbrook Museum. Digital scans of the crime scene were mediocre at best, a silver gray mosaic that offered little beyond the empty silhouette of a kitchen table. Decades stitched themselves together. In 2015, a re-examination of the denim jacket using a new DNA extraction protocol revealed a faint half-swap of hair, which was retested in 2017 after the advent of minütigen DNA splicing techniques. The lab confirmed a genetic match with a list of suspects, the most likely one being a former neighbor, Edward Marlowe, who had been dismissed from his position as a city engineer following an unrelated DUI in 1984. The evidence, though not outright assassinated, pointed to Zimmerman as the only suspect that matched the fingerprints recorded on the gum wrapper. August of 2023, justice finally moved. As the courtroom filled with the family, the courtroom's echoing silence turned into a document of emotional shift. The Morrises, who had endured every nightly "Where is Susan?" felt the weight of the final verdict. The crime scene's chill ambience had given way to the real coldness of evidence: a faint dusting of ash on the kitchen counter, an unexpected tremor in a vintage piano that had once carried Susan's laughter, and a single stained note in handwriting unmistakably that of Susan. Remember to lay out the trace, dear. The resolution of this 40-year-old case proves that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Advances in DNA technology and the dedication of investigators who refuse to give up can bring closure to families who have waited decades. For Susan Moore's family, the conviction brought a measure of peace, though nothing could undo the years of uncertainty they endured. Should all cold cases be re-examined with modern DNA technology? Let us know what you think in the comments. 13 priceless artworks stolen in a single night. $300 million worth of masterpieces gone. And the thieves were never caught. This is the greatest art heist in history. The searing summer of 1973 had turned the quiet streets of Florence into a stage for a crime that would echo through the halls of museums for decades. On the night of June 14, just after 11:15 Uhr abends, the Galleria degli Uffizi, a yeoman of Renaissance art, fell silent, its high-ceilinged atrium darked by the hush of night guards. The museum's central gallery, famed for Botticelli's Stern, the birth of Venus Stern and the Vinke Stern Annunciation Stern, was the target, but it was the sprawling complex that would test the sleuths who followed. The story begins with the night shift security officer, Lorenzo Moretti, who reported an unusual footfall in the hours preceding midnight. Moretti, 32 and later recognized for his meticulous patrol logs, noted that the main entrance's infrared sensors had flickered for exactly 51 seconds, a window sharp enough to be exploited by anyone knowing how to overpower Eiser's team's auto-generated fatal error. Moretti's tape, later recovered from a damaged hard drive, described a thin, unfamiliar figure slipping through the rear trapdoor left open by a mistakenly misaligned security gate. Later that night, the museum's chief curator, Elena Rossi, received an anonymous call from an unknown operator who insisted she secure a fire at the Italian Hall. The alarm triggered, but the alert was automatically muted by the rudimentary fire suppression system. The police canvas workers, whose duty was to sweep the perimeter for suspicious activity, found nothing but the faintest smell of burnt varnish, an aroma that lingered in the air long after the night's. What do you think? What do you think? Let us know in the comments.